Hello? How are you? I'm Mark Crispin Miller. I'm here to introduce tonight's speaker. As I stand here before you, we are sliding into fascism. Now, that's a fact that a lot of people don't like to face. It's happening. And it's something that's going to require an enormous collective response from Americans all across the political spectrum. Now, in times like these, we should be especially grateful for some people who know how to translate very important issues into the clearest possible English, and people who have the kind of political understanding that we really need. This is not any longer a left-right situation. At the present moment, we're faced with a kind of danger that makes it necessary for us to forget those old distinctions and come together on a whole different level. That's why we're really lucky to be here tonight with Thom Hartmann. Many of you probably have heard his show on Air America. You may know his books. His last book was What Would Jefferson Do?, which, as far as I'm concerned, is an indispensable work of patriotic analysis. He's got a new book out called Screwed, which is about the undeclared war against the middle class in America. But as he points out in this book, this is not just an economic issue. This is a civic and a moral issue of the profoundest importance. Thom really understands something that not enough Americans understand. Left or right, not enough Americans understand that there is an explosively radical possibility in our own revolution, in our own founding revolution. It's a possibility that's actually a lot more threatening to the status quo than any number of leftist theorists. I'm very pleased to be able to say that I wrote the foreword to this excellent new book. So we definitely need another American Revolution, and we need one that's going to last this time. So the best place for anyone to start is with Thom Hartmann's new book, Screwed. And here he is to talk about it. Join me in welcoming him.
Thank you. Good evening. Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here at Vox Pop and to see all of you here, and thanks so much. The title of the book, Screwed, our first thought was, how do we encapsulate in a word what's been happening for the last 26 years to the American middle class? And it's had some interesting side effects. Last week, I got a call from one of the editors at Hustler magazine. We understand you got a new book out called Screwed. Let's talk about this. But actually, it's a politically pretty progressive publication. So they actually understood that it was about politics and wanted to talk about that, which was, I was very pleased. What I'd like to do is just go through some of the basic premises of the book, so, basically the arc of the book, and share it with you, because these are the fundamental considerations, the fundamental understandings that in so many ways we have lost in the United States, particularly since the 1980s, when a whole series of wars were declared on the middle class for a very specific set of reasons that I'll get to in a minute, by really two different groups of people. And part of that war on the middle class included a war on the history of America, on the understanding of how a middle class comes about how the current contemporary American middle class came about, what the last time there was a middle class of any significant size in America, what that meant, and part of that war. I mean, it was during the Reagan years. They started criticizing school teachers who were teaching civics. Oh, they're teaching, you got a bunch of union teachers, they're teaching leftist stuff, it's communism, and now we don't teach civics anymore. I mean, we don't even, it's like we have an entire generation that has grown up not even knowing the fundamentals. And so I just wanted to cover some of these. I want to just blow up a few myths before we get into the nuts and bolts of this. And the first is the myth of the free market. We hear all this stuff about, we should have a free market. It's a free market. Isn't the free market a great thing? It's all the free market. There is no such thing as a free market outside of a small local barter system. If I say, hey, if you mow my lawn, I'll wash your car, that's a free market. But as soon as we decide that there is some contractual basis for how we're doing business, for how we're interacting, as soon as I decide, hey, you didn't mow my lawn, but I washed your car, now what am I going to do? I'm going to sue you, if I was going to. Now I need government. Right? In order for a market to exist, there has to be a set of rules for the game of the market. There has to be a court system to adjudicate those rules. There has to be an enforcement mechanism. If somebody doesn't play by the rules, they get hauled off and thrown in jail or get hit with fines. There has to be a definition of what is property. What is the difference between physical property and intellectual property? All these things are essential, and all these things, by the way, have changed over and over and over again throughout the years. Our understandings and definitions of what these things are. What is a domestic product versus what is an international product or a foreign product? What is an intellectual property versus a physical property? How long should somebody have the rights to intellectual property? All of these are part of the rules. It's just like saying, oh, let's have free baseball, right? Like we're going to play where? Without a baseball diamond, without rules and without umpires, you wouldn't have baseball then. So similarly, there's no such thing as a free market. We also have to have, in order for there to be a marketplace, there has to be some medium of exchange. So we have to have a government that is saying, okay, here's the currency that you can use for the marketplace. Here's, and they're maintaining some stability for that currency. Now, one of the fascinating things about laissez-faire capitalism, about unrestrained, raw capitalism, which is by and large the historic way that we have had what we've called the free market over the last 7,000 years. I mean, you go back to Sumeria, to the Epic of Gilgamesh, and they found in northern Iraq, which is where essentially our Western civilization started, pot shards that represent trades and deals and contracts, actual contract law. If you look back over the history of this 7,000 years, you see that very rarely did a middle class emerge. So there's this myth, another myth that I'd like to burst is the myth that a middle class is a normal thing. A middle class is not a normal thing. The fact of the matter is that what's normal is the world of Scrooge and Marley. What's normal is the world in a system of laissez-faire capitalism, which is pretty much what has dominated the last 7,000 years. What's normal is Mr. Scrooge saying, no, you can't have another lump of coal. Oh, no, please, Mr. Scrooge, may I have a lump of coal? My fingers are cold. No, you can't. Well, may I have health care for my son, Tiny Tim? No, you may not. It'll cost me an extra pence. Are you kidding? And we're not going to challenge our wealth. Yes, sir. Thank you. There we go. So much better. So the idea of the emergence of a middle class, many people today think, gee, a middle class is just kind of a normal thing. This is what it should be. And they're scratching their heads going, why is it going away? Why is it that in 1947, the year after the Republicans took control of the House and Senate and pushed through, over Harry Truman's veto, President Harry Truman, pushed through the Taft-Hartley Act, which diluted the 1935 Wagner Act, the National Labor Relations Act, that required unionization if more than 50% of employees in a workplace wanted to be members of a union. Why is it that at that point in time, that was like the peak of unionization in the United States, 35% of the American workforce was unionized. Typically for every union job, there is another essentially identical job in the workplace because the unions define the local floor for labor. So at that point in time, we had about 70% of the American workforce from 1947 up until 1980, more or less, who were in the middle class, who had the ability to basically have the life that the first Roosevelt, that Teddy Roosevelt, the Republican Roosevelt, described back in 1912 when he rolled out the Square Deal, where he said, we stand on the principle of a living wage. He invented the phrase. And he said a living wage will vary from region to region, but it should be enough that you can raise your family without having to resort to immorality. In other words, you don't have to steal to eat.